a 17-year-old German shepherd abandoned at a shelter in his final days. Everyone thought it was too late for him to find love again. Staff prepared for the inevitable as the ancient dog with cloudy eyes and arthritic joints struggled to even stand. But when an 83-year-old woman walked through those shelter doors, something extraordinary happened that left everyone speechless. This remarkable story of two souls finding each other in their twilight years will challenge everything you thought you knew about love, compassion, and the profound connections that can form when we're brave enough to open our hearts one last time. Max lay motionless on his thin blanket, the concrete floor's chill seeping through despite the staff's efforts to make him comfortable. At 17, the German Shepherd was ancient by canine standards, his muzzle entirely white, eyes clouded with cataracts, hips so stiff he could barely stand without assistance. "I'm sorry, old boy," whispered Dr. Jensen, the shelter veterinarian, gently checking Max's vitals. "We'll keep you comfortable, I promise." 3 days earlier, Max had arrived in the arms of a tearful middle-aged man, his owner of 15 years who could no longer care for him. "My wife died," the man had explained, voice breaking. "I'm moving into assisted living. They won't take him. Please, help him go peacefully." The staff had placed Max in the comfort room, a quiet space away from the kennel's chaos, where older dogs lived out their final days surrounded by soft beds, gentle hands, and the dignity they deserved. No one expected adoption. At 17, with multiple health issues, Max was considered hospice care. Lisa, the shelter manager, had created a special social media post anyway, a last-ditch effort that felt more ceremonial than hopeful. "Senior gentleman seeking quiet retirement home," she had written beneath Max's photo. 17-year-old Max has excellent manners, loves slow walks, and naps in the sun. His remaining time is short, but his capacity for love remains endless. The post received sympathetic comments, but no serious inquiries, until Tuesday morning when the phone rang. "I'm calling about the senior German Shepherd," said a woman's voice, slightly wavering with age. "Is he still available?" Lisa hesitated. "Yes, but ma'am, I should be transparent. Max is 17 with advanced arthritis, dental disease, and likely other issues we haven't diagnosed. He's essentially in palliative care." "I understand," the woman replied. "I'd still like to meet him. I'm 83 myself. We might suit each other perfectly." Lisa agreed, but warned her team not to get their hopes up. She probably doesn't realize how limited his mobility is, how much care he needs. Later that afternoon, the shelter doors opened, and Eleanor Bennett entered slowly, leaning on a carved wooden cane. Her white hair was neatly styled, her clothes simple but elegant. Behind her alert blue eyes lay a quiet determination that caught Lisa off guard. "I'm here to meet Max," Eleanor announced. "And before you try to discourage me, young lady, know that I've come with full intention of taking him home, provided we get along, of course." Eleanor followed Lisa to the comfort room, her cane tapping gently against the floor. Her pace was unhurried but deliberate, a woman who had learned that life moved at its own necessary speed. "He's just through here," Lisa said, opening the door. "We try to keep this area quiet for our elderly residents." Max lay curled on his bed, eyes half open. When the door opened, his tail moved slightly, more a gentle drift than a wag, the most energy he could muster for visitors. Lisa began explaining Max's medical needs, but Eleanor moved past her, slowly lowering herself onto a small stool beside the ancient dog's bed. Arthritis in her knees made the movement difficult, but she managed with practiced dignity. "Hello there, distinguished gentleman," Eleanor said softly, making no move to touch Max yet. "My name is Eleanor. I understand you're looking for a retirement home." Max's cloudy eyes focused on her as best they could. His tail moved again, slightly stronger. "May I?" Eleanor asked, extending her hand palm up for Max to sniff. The old dog stretched his neck slightly, nostrils working to gather information about this visitor. After a moment, he gave her fingers a gentle lick. Eleanor smiled, then looked up at Lisa. We've just had our first conversation, and I believe we understand each other perfectly. Carefully, with movements just as deliberate as Max's own, Eleanor began stroking his head. Her fingers, knobbed with arthritis, moved with surprising tenderness across his white muzzle. 17, you said? Eleanor asked. Yes, Lisa confirmed. Quite remarkable for his breed. We're monitoring him for pain, but so far he seems comfortable with his medications. Eleanor nodded. I was 80 last year when I buried my husband of 60 years. Everyone suggested I move in with my daughter or into a retirement community. She continued petting Max. I declined. My home is where my memories live, where I can still be myself, not someone's responsibility. Max shifted slightly, moving his head to rest against Eleanor's knee. The young think they understand what's best for the old, she continued. They focus on safety, on what might go wrong. They forget about joy, about purpose. Her hand never stopped its gentle rhythm along Max's fur. They mean well, but they can't possibly understand what it's like to have everyone waiting for you to become a burden. Lisa remained silent, watching as the elderly woman and ancient dog seemed to communicate something beyond words. How long does he have? Eleanor asked finally. We're not sure. Weeks, maybe months. It's hard to say. Eleanor nodded. Then we haven't any time to waste, have we, Max? The German shepherd's tail thumped twice against his bed, as if in agreement. The adoption paperwork was unprecedented. Never had the shelter released a hospice animal to someone over 80 who lived alone. The staff's concerns were valid. What if Max needed to be carried? What if Eleanor fell trying to help him? What if his care became too much? Eleanor addressed each question with calm logic. Yes, her neighbor's teenage son would help with lifting if needed. Yes, she had a veterinarian selected who made house calls. Yes, she understood the financial commitment. I've outlived my husband, outlived 2 of my children, outlived my retirement savings, and then some, she explained. My remaining daughter set up a trust fund for me after Roger died. There's plenty to care for one elderly dog. Dr. Jensen had a private word with Eleanor after examining Max one final time. His quality of life is our primary concern. If his pain becomes unmanageable, I understand, Eleanor interrupted gently. I won't let him suffer. I've made those difficult decisions before. The reference to her deceased husband and children hung in the air. Dr. Jensen nodded. I'll coordinate with your veterinarian. Lisa helped load supplies into Eleanor's ancient but immaculately maintained Buick. Medications, special food, a memory foam bed. Max traveled in the back seat, secured comfortably for the short drive. I can't tell you how unusual this is, Lisa admitted as she closed the car door. Most people want puppies, or at least younger dogs with years ahead of them. Eleanor smiled. Time is relative, dear. The quality of days matters more than their number. 3 days later, Lisa made the first welfare check, arriving at Eleanor's small craftsman-style home with a mix of hope and trepidation. What she found surprised her completely. Max was lying on his new bed in a sunny spot by the living room window, but it wasn't his comfort that struck Lisa. It was his attentiveness. The old dog was watching Eleanor as she moved slowly around her kitchen, his eyes tracking her with an awareness Lisa hadn't seen at the shelter. He's different, Lisa observed, after Eleanor welcomed her inside. We both are, Eleanor replied. Having someone to care for changes everything. On the wall, Lisa noticed a new framed photograph. Eleanor and Max in the garden, his head resting against her leg, sunlight dappling through overhead branches. My neighbor's son took that yesterday, Eleanor explained. Our first portrait. What struck Lisa most wasn't just Max's improved demeanor, but Eleanor's. The elderly woman moved with more purpose, her eyes brighter, her energy seemingly renewed by having light in her life. He's sleeping through the night, Eleanor reported, and this morning, he walked all the way to the corner and back with me. Lisa had never expected this outcome, The hospice adoption was meant to give Max a comfortable end, surrounded by love. She hadn't considered how it might transform Eleanor, too. "You've given him a new home," Lisa said. Eleanor shook her head slightly. "No, dear. We've given each other a new purpose." Weeks passed, and Max defied everyone's expectations. The dog, who could barely stand at the shelter, now managed short walks around Eleanor's garden twice daily. His appetite improved, his eyes seemed more focused, and while his arthritis remained, his willingness to move increased. "It's not unusual," Dr. Rivera, the house call veterinarian, explained during a checkup. "Environment significantly impacts geriatric patients, human or animal. Max feels safe, loved, needed. It makes a difference." Eleanor nodded, understanding completely. Her own health had improved as well. The routine of caring for Max provided structure to her days. Measuring medications, preparing special meals, gentle grooming sessions. These tasks required attention and presence. There was less time to dwell on losses or limitations. Lisa's weekly visits became a highlight for both Eleanor and Max. Today, she arrived with news. "Your story has gone viral," she announced, showing Eleanor her phone. The shelter's post about the 83-year-old woman adopting a 17-year-old dog had been shared thousands of times. Comments poured in from around the world, most celebrating the beautiful bond between two seniors giving each other purpose in their twilight years. Eleanor seemed amused but unmoved by the attention. "People are fascinated by the old," she observed, stroking Max's ear as he leaned against her chair. "They either dismiss us or romanticize us. Rarely do they simply see us." "The shelter has received a surge in applications for senior dogs," Lisa continued. 3 of our oldest residents found homes this week alone." This news brought genuine delight to Eleanor's face. "Now that's a worthwhile outcome, isn't it, Max?" The German Shepherd sighed contentedly, as if in agreement. Later that evening, as Eleanor and Max sat together on the porch, watching the sunset, another ritual they'd established, Eleanor's daughter Margaret arrived unexpectedly. "Mom, why didn't you tell me about the dog?" she demanded, gesturing toward Max. "I had to hear about it from Cousin Beth, who saw it online." Eleanor remained calm. "Hello to you too, Margaret. This is Max." Margaret's expression softened slightly as she looked at the elderly dog resting beside her mother's chair. "Mom, I worry enough about you living alone. Adding a sick animal to care for." "Max isn't a burden," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "He's a companion, there's a difference." "But what happens when he needs more care? Or when he dies?" Eleanor finished. "Life continues, dear. I've had some practice with that." Margaret sat in the empty chair, frustrated but trying to understand. "I just worry." "I know you do," Eleanor acknowledged. "But there are worse things than dying, Margaret. Living without purpose is far more tragic." As they spoke, Max rose stiffly and moved to place his head on Margaret's knee, his cloudy eyes meeting hers with gentle wisdom. After a moment's hesitation, she reached down to stroke his white muzzle. "He's trying to tell you not to worry," Eleanor said softly. "He's quite wise that way." With autumn came new challenges. The cooling temperatures made Max's arthritis more painful, and some mornings he struggled to rise from his bed. Eleanor, whose own joints protested the changing weather, understood completely. "Aging isn't for the faint of heart, is it, my friend?" she would say as they both took their morning medications, hers for blood pressure and cholesterol, his for inflammation and pain. On difficult days, they adjusted. Short walks became shorter, or sometimes just sitting together in the garden wrapped in warm blankets. Eleanor read aloud from novels while Max dozed beside her, occasionally opening his eyes to watch a bird, or shifting his head to receive her gentle pets. Dr. Rivera made monthly visits now, carefully monitoring Max's quality of life. "He's comfortable," she assured Eleanor after each examination. "You're doing everything right." By now, Eleanor and Max had developed a language of subtle gestures and habits that only they understood. When Max stood by the bookshelf, Eleanor knew he wanted story time. When he rested his head on her knee during dinner, he wasn't begging but simply wanting closeness. When Eleanor spent too long sitting in one position, Max would nudge her hand until she moved and stretched, looking after her as much as she looked after him. Lisa's visits continued, though less as welfare checks and more as friendly calls. She brought news from the shelter. The Max effect, as staff now called it, had resulted in 12 senior dog adoptions since Eleanor's story went public. Today's visit was special. Lisa arrived with a photographer from the local newspaper who wanted to document Eleanor and Max for a feature story on senior pet adoption. "You've started quite a movement," the photographer explained as she captured images of Eleanor and Max in their garden. "People are rethinking what it means to adopt an older animal." Eleanor positioned herself carefully on the garden bench, Max leaning against her leg. "People fear endings," she said. "They forget that every chapter of a story has value, even the final one." The photographer asked them to look toward the camera, but Max kept his gaze fixed on Eleanor instead. The resulting photo, an elderly woman smiling at the camera, while her ancient dog gazed up at her with undisguised adoration, would eventually become the shelter's new logo. After the photographer left, Lisa helped Eleanor prepare Max's afternoon medications. 6 months, Lisa said quietly. "No one expected him to live this long when you adopted him." Eleanor nodded. "Time is a gift, but it's never the point. Connection is what matters." They both watched as Max, having taken his medicine, settled into his sun-warm bed by the window, sighing contentedly as he drifted to sleep. "I wondered in the beginning if you needed him or if he needed you," Lisa admitted. "Now I realize it was both." Eleanor smiled. The best relationships always are. Winter arrived with unusual gentleness that year. Soft rains rather than harsh frosts. Mild temperatures that eased the ache in old bones. Max, now approaching his 18th birthday by Eleanor's calculations, had defied every timeline the veterinarians had suggested. "I don't understand it medically," Dr. Rivera confessed during a checkup. "Given his age and conditions, he should have declined months ago." Eleanor, who sat beside Max's bed during the examination, smiled softly. "Perhaps medicine doesn't account for everything that matters." The holidays brought visits from Eleanor's extended family, including Margaret, whose initial skepticism about Max had transformed into grudging admiration. She arrived with a custom-made orthopedic bed for him, larger and more supportive than his current one. "I found a company that specializes in beds for geriatric dogs," Margaret explained as they set it up in Max's favorite sunny spot. "It should help with his joint pain." Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hand in silent gratitude. Christmas Eve found Eleanor and Max listening to classical music beside a small decorated tree. The German Shepherd lay with his head in Eleanor's lap, eyes half closed in contentment as she gently stroked his ears. "Quite a year we've had together, my friend," she murmured. "Not bad for 2 old souls that everyone had written off." Max's tail thumped gently against the couch in response. A peaceful routine had settled around them, morning medications followed by a short walk, if weather permitted. Afternoons reading or watching nature programs. Max showed particular interest in shows featuring other animals. Evenings on the porch or by the fireplace. Simple pleasures savored fully. The new year brought a milestone. Max's unofficial 18th birthday. Eleanor couldn't know his exact age, of course, but she had selected January 15th as his special day. Lisa and several shelter staff visited for a small celebration. 18 years for a German Shepherd must be some kind of record, one staff member remarked, watching Max carefully eat a small piece of specially prepared cake. "Records aren't important," Eleanor replied. "It's the journey that matters." When the guests departed, Eleanor sat beside Max on his new bed, his head heavy against her leg. Snow had begun falling outside, large flakes drifting past the window in hypnotic patterns. When I went to the shelter that day, she said softly, I told them we might suit each other perfectly. I was right, wasn't I? Max gazed up at her with eyes that, despite their cloudiness, held nothing but devotion. That night, as they settled into their respective beds, Eleanor's just a few feet from Max's, she whispered into the darkness, Whatever time we have left, my friend, know that you've made these days count. Max's gentle snoring was her only answer, but it was enough. Spring arrived in a riot of color and renewal. Eleanor's garden bloomed with crocuses and daffodils, early tulips pushing through soil warmed by strengthening sunlight. Max, who had weathered the winter better than anyone expected, still enjoyed sitting outside, his nose lifted to catalog the season's changing scents. 18 months had passed since the day Eleanor walked into the shelter and changed everything. The dog, given weeks to live, had thrived for over a year in her care. The woman told she was too old to adopt had proven that age was no barrier to providing love and exceptional care. Their story had spread far beyond the local newspaper. A national magazine had featured them in an article about seniors adopting senior pets. A children's book author had created a story inspired by them, with proceeds benefiting the shelter. Eleanor accepted this attention graciously, but remained unimpressed by fame. Living well is its own reward, she told Lisa during one of her now monthly visits. Everything else is just noise. Today was special. The shelter was hosting its annual spring fundraiser, and Eleanor and Max were guests of honor. The event had been carefully planned around Max's needs, with a quiet space set aside for him to rest and only a brief appearance expected. Margaret arrived to drive them to the shelter, having become an unexpected advocate for senior pet adoption herself. She helped Eleanor dress in a spring suit, then gently assisted Max with the special harness that made it easier to support his hind end when necessary. You both look distinguished, Margaret observed as she helped them to the car. The shelter had been transformed with spring decorations and refreshments. A banner stretched across the entrance. Every senior deserves a loving home. Beside it hung the now famous photograph of Eleanor and Max in the garden, his adoring gaze fixed on her face. Lisa greeted them at the door, escorting them to seats of honor. We've adopted out 38 senior dogs since your story went public, she informed Eleanor proudly. We're calling it the Max effect. Eleanor smiled, her hand resting on Max's head as he leaned against her chair. 38 new beginnings. How wonderful. The event director invited Eleanor to speak, offering to bring a microphone to her seat so she wouldn't have to stand. That won't be necessary, Eleanor replied, slowly rising with the aid of her cane. Max watched her carefully, rising stiffly himself as if unwilling to let her stand alone. Together, the elderly woman and ancient dog made their way to the small podium. A hush fell over the crowded room. Most people thought I was foolish, Eleanor began, her voice soft but clear. Adopting a 17-year-old dog at 83? They saw only endings approaching. They missed the beautiful chapter we could write together. Max stood beside her, his white muzzle held high despite his obvious effort. Time is precious at any age, Eleanor continued. But perhaps we elders understand its value most acutely. Every sunrise becomes a gift, every shared meal a celebration. She looked down at Max, whose cloudy eyes remained fixed on her with unwavering devotion. This magnificent dog was discarded when his usefulness seemed ended. I was quietly encouraged to surrender my independence when my age made others uncomfortable. Together, we found purpose again. The room remained silent, captivated. If our story teaches anything, let it be this. The final chapters may be the most beautiful of all, if we're brave enough to write them. As if understanding the significance of the moment, Max pressed gently against Eleanor's leg in support. Later, as Eleanor and Max sat in the garden at home, watching the sun set on another day they hadn't been promised. She reflected on the journey that had brought them together. Two souls others had written off, finding in each other exactly what they needed. Not just comfort in their twilight years, but purpose, companionship, and the dignified acknowledgement that their stories still mattered. Max dozed beside her chair, his breathing deep and even. Eleanor placed her hand gently on his side, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart, grateful for each beat. "We did it, old friend," she whispered. "We showed them all what's possible when you refuse to surrender to other people's timelines." Max's tail thumped gently against the ground in response, still present, still living each day fully, still proving that the final chapter could indeed be the most beautiful of all.